I keep my own time. Terry, that was amazing. First of all, JSB and Ann, thank you very much. If you essentially prepped my slides for me to keep the presentation unclassified, if you could just keep a picture of Terry's planning room with the desk and the tactical center, that's essentially what we looked like overseas in Afghanistan, Yemen, Nairobi, lots of different countries when I was working in special operations. And so in order to try to bridge the gap, unless there's another special operations person in here, try to paint the picture for you on what we were doing overseas from 2005 really until about 2011 when I was operational at the ground level. You can imagine the military used to work in such a way that a ground unit would receive a tasking from a larger, let's say everybody I think has heard of SOCOM, the Special Operations Command, which is in Tampa, Florida. But there's large units of 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 people overseas, of course in Iraq and Afghanistan over the last 15 years, but in smaller countries as well, where there's a commanding officer, a CEO, there's a human intelligence group that's physically in their own space, there's a signals intelligence group that's physically in their own office, there's a imagery intelligence group, there's ground combat units, there's air assets, there's fixed wing air assets, there's helicopter assets, there's folks who make your maps, there's folks who make your grids, and all these people, not only do they plan individually, but they live individually and they organize all by themselves in their own spaces and nobody mixes. And this was essentially how the military has been organized since the beginning of the U.S. military until around 2005. And in special operations, I wouldn't say we were necessarily losing or getting our butts kicked, but we realized that operations could not live independently of all these different intelligence units and all these other operational support units such as airplanes and helicopters. And so around 2005, we realized that the military had essentially been taking clearly a hierarchical approach to the way we plan and operate. And every single problem that we saw was organized around these individual technical expertises or versions of expertise. And so that, as a unit that sees, if they see a nail, the terminology was, if you have a hammer, everything's a nail. That's how we were addressing every problem in special operations. So we were doing about, I want to sort of describe the operation and give you a visual picture and talk to you about some of the numbers. We were doing one operation in a given geographic area, maybe that's a couple hundred square miles in a geographic area. In 2007, I was northeast of Baghdad by about 85 miles up in the Diyala River Valley. We had a 120-person unit on a small base. There's a battle space owner in this area, a big Army unit that essentially owns this battle space. And we can only do one operation in that space every 3 nights. So we were doing essentially 10 operations a month. What we started to do, as JSB's described many times, is use all the digital tools that we had. We had physical tools that we called Common Operational Picture. We had Palantir tools that we could load every bit of intelligence that we had in the space that would give us a broader picture of what was going on in the geographic area. And we really had a key forum. Terry described the key forum that they do every single day. Did you say 12 to 1, Terry? So every single day across 47 countries, we would put about 20,000 people on an operations and intel briefing. And those 20,000 people range from the lowest person. I was relatively low compared to, the SOCOM and JSOC commanders. I was at a tactical unit, as I said. It's really 50 people in a troop, but the 120 people, I had a bunch of intelligence enablers when I was up in northeast Iraq. But on that 20,000 person operations and intel briefing, it was a completely open forum in the sense that if we were sitting in here and we were a small unit, we would see on the screen the commander of SOCOM, the commander of JSOC, the intelligence units in Yemen, the intelligence units in Nairobi, the intelligence units in Somalia, all 47 countries. And the 20,000 is probably high, but well over 10,000 people were on this operations and intel briefing. In that briefing, it looked very much like the room that Terry presented to us. All the information available to every single unit across every single country was really important, especially when foreign fighters are moving across these boundaries. So as an example, the commander if it was General McChrystal in my case, I wasn't always talking on this operations and intel briefing when I was in Northeast Iraq. But if he was in another country and someone, intelligence person, some sort of report was being fed back to the hierarchy, he wouldn't just look to his senior staffer or look to another person in the room with him. He would stop the briefing. He would ask his chief of staff, who's in country X? He would queue up that person digitally, and then he would ask me or somebody else in another country, what were we seeing? And oftentimes, at the lowest ground tactical level, the ground tactical unit would clearly have the best information. Prior to 2005, that was completely unheard of in an organization like the U.S. military. I mean, every single direction came down from the top. And so what we had was essentially this ground level intelligence rising up to the top, and instead of top-down tasking coming down to us wherever we were essentially tasking upward to our commanders, generating these target packages and these opportunities ourselves. By the time we got to 2006, 2007, in one physical space just like this, if this was my planning space, I would have, not only did I have access to information that I wasn't able to access before, but we would have a ground unit commander, we would have a fixed-wing aircraft pilot, we would have a helicopter pilot, we would have an analyst from NSA, we would have an analyst from the CIA, we would have Defense Intelligence Agency folks, we would have civilians from the intelligence community, all in one planning space. We used to call it the Star Wars bar. And it's really funny that we thought about it that way, because as time went on and we got closer to 2008, 9, and 10, and our operational tempo went from that one operation every third night, so 10 operations a month, we could do 3 operations a night, essentially got a 9 to 10x return on our operational tempo. And so there weren't 10 operations in a month, there were 90 operations in a month. And this was the kind of tempo that we could keep because we were getting real-time data feedback, either from a physical picture, an intelligence picture, or a human interaction picture, just as Terry talked about. We could have really used those tools 10 years ago, Terry. So what did the new system do for us? I mean, I think everybody knows or has at least read about the Bin Laden operation, which I was not on, but we did not have a tempo or a digital platform or a mindset really from an agency perspective to approach problems in that way. I think the military probably fell into that, what is used to doing things that way, simply because when you come into special operations in the military, any unit, you get assigned a job. It's called an MOS, and you stay in that job. And so I think over time, it was very hard to break this mindset because you have a problem, you assign that problem to a certain person who has a certain job, and they give you some piece of information back. What we started to do was obviously as I described, organize around the problem instead of organizing around the person. The last comment I think I'll make, JSB, because I was watching the videos from the first 2 sessions, and there was a lot of discussion about agency. And there's a good friend of mine at the University of Pennsylvania who's working on a project called Mission Critical Teams. And he does a lot of analysis around selecting, training, when somebody becomes an expert, a technical expert or an operator, and then when they essentially become an alumnus of the organization. He adapted Nonaka, Maslow, and Birch's model of the 4 stages of learning any new skill. The unconscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, conscious competence, and then unconscious competence. And so I wanted to talk about something here because it became very important to us at the operational level that, rookies, what we would call a rookie who was essentially in an assimilation phase, was pretty competent at what they do, consciously competent. And then someone with technical expertise who became unconsciously competent. And then what we considered an operator was essentially in a position of collaboration and integration where they had shared competence. And what we discovered with people who didn't work so well in a complex environment were those folks who got stuck at technician, where they were unconsciously competent at what they did and became somewhat complacent in their skill level. If a person in that level of their learning could squeeze that down and almost to nothing and really go from rookie and back to operator, so essentially I'm consciously competent or I'm an integrator, and toggle back and forth between those 2 capacities, then that person was much more effective on a small team doing what we were doing, because there was never a problem that was simple or complicated in the sense that it could be assigned and solved. It was either a complex problem, as Dave and Stoughton obviously described, or it trended much more closely to chaotic. Because there were very few problems that we dealt with that had one solution that we would see again. And many times we would never see the same problem or the same solution on any given night. So, 6 or 7 different nights in the field, 6 or 7 problem sets, all with a different answer. The only thing that really got us over that, JSB, as you mentioned, is looking at agency in the right way, applying the digital tools correctly, and understanding and having the expectation that when you go out on any given night into the field, you're definitely going to see something that you can't solve. And having that awareness was extremely helpful to our teams. Thanks very much.